We'll bring this back here. Get this all set up. Okay, welcome back to another episode. We're back. Today we are talking about fatty liver disease, which has become super common. But what's even become more common is the non-alcoholic variety. So there was a time, believe it or not, when a fatty liver disease was mostly due to excessive alcohol intake, but that is no longer the case. So the predominant type of liver disease that exists right now is actually non-alcoholic, means alcohol is not the primary driver of the fatty liver. Now, this is super common. It ends up coinciding with a lot of things we see with metabolic type syndromes, right? So, insulin resistance, perhaps being overweight, high triglycerides, things like that. So all of these things kind of come together in this constellation. And then usually fatty liver, or at least finding out that you have fatty liver, usually happens on accident. It's usually not a first thing that it's usually don't know you have it. It's not something that necessarily has symptoms. So we're going to dive into it right now. So first of all, let's start with what is fatty liver. So it's really important because the liver, as you guys know, is really important. It has a lot of jobs. It has to filter everything that goes through your body. It helps pull out nutrients. It turns toxins into harmless byproducts so they can be excreted and eliminated from the body. It also creates different building blocks for the bodies, things like enzymes, proteins. Those things are made in the liver. So we got a lot of different jobs that the liver does on a regular basis. Now, non-alcoholic fatty liver is the result of fatty acids that build up in the liver on top of its inability to remove waste that we need to get rid of at a specific time. So fatty acids end up building up. There's fatty deposits in the liver at the same time. We're not removing them as appropriately as we should. So this kind of leads to issues. Now, sometimes this could be due to genetic anomalies where the liver can't do its job effectively. And because of this, there's fat deposits, fat buildup in the liver. But sometimes it could also be due to faulty enzymes. So the enzymes are not functioning as they should in the liver. So this could also lead to a potential issue when it comes to fatty liver. Now, here's the thing. There are many different vitamins, minerals, amino acids that the liver needs to go through phase 1 and 2 detoxification. And we're going to go into that a little bit later. So if we don't have all of those nutrients that we need, the liver is going to have a lot of trouble doing its job. So one of the primary concerns is going to be, do we have all the nutrients, the raw materials that we need for the liver to do its job? Now, non-alcoholic fatty liver, it causes inflammation. And if there is not enough of those reserved nutrients to compensate, the liver is not going to be able to keep up with its normal job and combat the inflammation. So in order to limit the damage, to stop the bleeding, so to speak, the liver is going to try to, fence in the inflammation so it doesn't spread. This leads to fibrosis. Now, this actually alters the architecture of the liver at the cellular and the global level. So we could see this both with our eyes or through some sort of, or you can see it at the cellular level too. So, and if this fibrosis kind of builds up, it can interfere with blood flow. It could interfere with bile production and removal, and it could escalate to the point where you get cirrhosis or scarring. And then once you get scarring of the liver, that liver tissue is not able to do its job anymore. So we don't want that. It could also lead to portal hypertension, which we don't want either. So why is this all important? Well, I made a post on this today, but it is worth repeating. Now, according to the EPA, the average American has over 700 chemicals in his or her body, a terrible toxic burden, and one our bodies are ill-equipped to handle. Exposure to toxic chemicals and heavy metals is occurring at an unprecedented rate in human history, triggering the development of devastating illnesses such as Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and cancer. Bottom line, we got to show our liver some love so it can do its job for us too. So what do we know? What can happen with fatty liver? Now, usually fatty liver is actually asymptomatic. You might not feel anything. What tends to happen is you might have abnormal liver enzymes on a lab test, or you might, come across it if you're getting an abdominal CT scan or an ultrasound done. You might find out, hey, you have a fatty liver. Now you might not feel it, you might not know, but that's usually how you find out. Now the lab markers that you would look for are things like ALT or AST. When those are elevated, those could be indicators that there's something. Well, they are indicators that there's something going on with your liver. It could be that fatty liver is could be there. Some things you also might notice, there might be fatigue, malaise. You might have some vague discomfort in the right upper quadrant of your abdomen, so that's important to kind of keep notice. You might have some redness in your palms. That can be something that's an issue. Some other kind of markers to be aware of. If your triglyceride to HDL ratio is greater than 3, or if your triglycerides are over 130 milligrams per deciliter, that indicates hypertriglyceridemia, which is associated with um, non-alcoholic fatty liver. It is also associated, and this is really important, is the triglycerides, but also type 2 diabetes and obesity. Now, when the liver is exposed to pro-oxidant compounds, and this is what we see in inflammation, and this usually comes with insulin resistance. The first reaction is the infiltration of fat into the liver. This is what causes those fat deposits in the liver. As those fat deposits are laid down, the liver gets enlarged, and over time, this could lead to the scarring that we talked about. And when we get to cirrhosis, that's no good. We don't want that. That's going to lead to potentially permanent damage of your liver. So we want to make sure we can reverse it while we can and limit the damage at the end of the day. Now, this takes years to develop, and it is predominantly caused by poor diet, usually going to be poor quality fats. It's going to be refined sugars, inadequate exercise. So your detox pathways aren't working properly. You're not pooping a couple times a day. You're not drinking enough water. You're not moving your body, getting that flowing. All of these things are going to be playing a role. That being said, if you're not doing any of those things, this can accelerate the potential um, development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So really important to keep in mind. Certain drugs can lead to liver damage, like acetaminophen or Tylenol. I'm sure you might have heard of that before. Amiodarone, certain antiviral drugs, aspirins, corticosteroids, methotrexate, nifedipine, tamoxifen, tetracycline. All of these can potentially cause liver damage. So important to keep that in mind. If you're struggling with liver, maybe then we need to kind of take a look back and see kind of the whole picture. So, and again, the thing is, and this is the thing, is it's pretty insidious. You don't necessarily know that you have fatty liver until you come across it, because a lot of people who have this just don't have any symptoms. Now, if you do nothing, if you don't change any of your lifestyle habits, you could potentially get to a point where your liver undergoes cirrhosis, where there's permanent damage. This becomes a real issue. There's scarring of the liver. The hard scar tissue replaces the softer, healthier tissue of the liver. And then cirrhosis could potentially turn into cancer down the road. So we really don't want that. Now, we know our ability to detoxify is crucial because our liver is the most important organ for that. That's its primary function, along with some of the others we talked about. It also produces bile, stores glucose in the form of glycogen. Although the muscles have most of our glycogen stores, but liver is an important glycogen storage area too. It also works around the clock to analyze everything that is coming through our body that's absorbed through the small intestine. So that liver is always churning, always going, and always making a big difference. So the question is, like, what can you do to kind of, and then after that, we need to make sure that we can recognize the toxin, turn it into something that we can excrete, and then excrete it appropriately, either through the bladder or through a bowel movement. So, you know, all of this is going to play a role. Like, are you getting the proper, you know, flushing that you need from your liver to do its job. So it sounds simple, but it's actually a bit complex. So there are actually over around 100 enzymes that are responsible for detoxification processes. So these enzymes collectively are called cytochrome P450. You might see this as CP450. Um, the primary function of these enzymes is to convert fat soluble toxins into water soluble compounds that we can excrete either in bile or in urine. So ultimately, it's broken down into two primary steps. There's phase one and phase two. The first phase, and over these two phases, they turn again these harmful toxins into harmless byproducts that we can then excrete properly. But if this gets backed up, if it's not doing its job properly, this could lead to issues down the road. So when we're exposed to, say, a toxic substance, it increases CP450 enzyme activity. This What happens then is it goes through phase one and phase two detoxification, and then we have to kind of eliminate it appropriately. So that's why it's important to kind of do this back end work. So the first step is these toxic compounds are usually turned into some sort of reactive intermediary compound. Now, ironically, these intermediates could potentially be more dangerous than the actual toxin itself. And you might be like, well, Dr. Vin, I don't understand. Why would you do that? Well, this intermediate step is needed so that we can turn it into something that's water soluble that we can get rid of. So we have to make sure that phase one and phase two are both working appropriately. It's so we need to make sure that both of them are working kind of at the same pace. So this is where phase two comes into play. So phase two, you take this highly reactive toxic intermediate and you bind it to proteins or sulfur groups or methyl groups that render them harmless. So we turn it into something water soluble, then we add something to it that renders it pretty much harmless. And then the end result, it gets eliminated via stool or via urine. So we kind of need those two steps to get rid of it, and we need to make sure both of them are working properly and that they're in balance. So really important to kind of keep that in mind. I hope that makes sense here. Now, certain medications and supplements are metabolized by these enzymes too. It's important to keep those in mind kind of as you're going here. So when phase one and phase two reactions are out of balance, this can lead to potential health issues. So, for example, if you have a phase one reactions that are working really fast, but phase two is kind of lagging behind, you can get that buildup of those harmful reactive intermediates, and you could have chronically elevated cytochrome P450 enzymes. We don't want that. So, and it's important to realize that the phase one is not going to slow down just because phase two can't keep up. So it's really about finding a balance between the two. Um, you don't want to deal with that damage. It could potentially lead to um, free radical damage down the road if we don't have this balance between phase one and phase two. So, the buildup can be damaging. It can lead to tissue damage, inflammation, and contribute to potential longer term issues if it isn't addressed. So, certain things that can increase cytochrome P450 activity that could lead to these types of issues: alcohol consumption, nicotine, acetaminophen, iron deficiency, and like a very high protein diet can do it. Now, on the other hand, phase one reactions can slow down too. And this has its own set of issues where toxins are left in the bloodstream that are free to circulate. That's no good either. So we want to make sure, again, that we're working at a pace where both of these can kind of do their job at a rate that mirrors each other in a good way. I hope that makes sense. So, if the CP450 cannot function properly, it could lead to chronically high levels of histamines and hormone buildup that should go through detoxification, and this could lead to inflammation on the back end. So, again, things that can affect this are things like uh, processed sugars, certain nutrient deficiencies, antihistamines, vitamin A or C deficiencies, certain toxins, and things like diazepams. So really important to kind of keep that in mind. Um, Other things that we can use. So it's interesting. So around 50% of humans should have normally functioning cytochrome P450 functions. 30% tend to have slower pathways, and 20% are considered fast detoxifiers. But the key here is to find balance between phase one and two. That is really the key. So if you avoid a lot of those things that I talked about, this should help synchronize phase one and phase two reactions. So, and things that are especially helpful are going to be things like green tea, sulfur containing fruits and vegetables, garlic, onions, quercetin, peppers, cruciferous vegetables. All of these are going to help balance those phase one and two uh, detoxification pathways, along with your antioxidants like vitamins A, C, and E, zinc, magnesium, selenium. All of those are crucially, vitally important to liver function. Methylation can also play a role. So you want to make sure we have higher amounts or optimal amounts, I should say, of things like vitamin B6, folate, B12. The reason is that if we don't have a properly functioning methylation cycle, this could elevate homocysteine, and we know homocysteine is a measure of inflammation. So we want to make sure that that's kind of working as best as it could. Now, the methylation cycle in itself is a whole separate talk to go into, but in general, it's responsible for over 200 different processes in the body, including DNA synthesis, neurotransmitter production, histamine metabolism, making sure those detox pathways are functioning properly, estrogen metabolism, fat metabolism, more and more eye health, liver health, cellular energy. The list goes on and on. When this is disrupted, we see increased rates of things like cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, neurological disorders, reproductive issues, and increases in certain types of cancers. So we really want to make sure that our methylation cycle is functioning as properly as it should. So what can you do? What are the takeaways? What can we do, to kind of make this better, right? So first is we has to be, you have to get insulin sensitivity under control. What we see with non-alcoholic fatty liver is that insulin resistance, blood sugar metabolism regulation issues are part and parcel. It seems to be, it's very, very common. So we want to make sure that we're getting rid of the refined, simple sugars, carbohydrates as best we can. We want to make sure that we can bring balance back to our insulin response. That is going to be key. So processed foods, simple sugars, snacks, all those candies, those got to go. We got to replace those with the antioxidant rich foods, ideally organic if you can get them, but a lot of different colors. So we definitely want, this is where eating the rainbow is super, super important. We get, yes, all those different vitamins and minerals, but also those different phytonutrients that come from those different pigments in the food. So really important to kind of get those. Dark leafy greens are especially good. Mentioned beets, garlic, onions. These are all great things that are going to support the liver, other than with those nutrients that I talked about in the past. So that's going to be key. Good rule of thumb. So the more vibrantly colored foods are, real foods, by the way, the higher levels of antioxidants they tend to have. So, that would be a good thing. My thing is, and I always say this, is like, if you're at the store, if you're shopping for the week, make sure you got something for each color of the rainbow in your grocery basket. At least one thing, and I would double up on the greens. You want to make sure you got something red and orange and yellow and a lot of greens and blue or purple. And I call the whites, that's going to be, your aromatics, your garlic, ginger, onions, cauliflower. So like all of those things, like you need colors in there in your grocery basket every time you go. We got to make sure that our detox pathways are open and working properly. So breath is really important. Are you diaphragmatically breathing? Are you bringing the breath all the way into your belly and then breathing out at a normal pace? Are you always hyperventilating? Are you super stressed out? Are your shoulders up all the time? That's going to be really important. That could inhibit your ability to detoxify properly. Why? Because about 70% of the toxins in our body are eliminated through the breath. So making sure we are breathing properly is super, super super critical. Along with movement, because sweat is going to be so that, remember, there's four main ways after we go through this detoxification pathway, four main ways that we detoxify. Breath is the main one, but then we have to make sure, are we drinking enough water and urinating? Are we pooping every day? Ideally, 2 to 3 times a day. And are we sweating on a regular basis? Now, I know people love saunas. I prefer exercise more if you can do it, because muscle contraction is the key to getting that lymphatic system running. The lymphatic system does not have a pump. The pump is movement, it's muscles. It is moving our muscles every day, doing some sort of exercise. So if we are moving our bodies, that lymph is flowing. And the more we sit around, the more that lymph gets stagnant. That's really, really important to understand. The other part is, of course, water. We want to make sure we have clean water, guys. So, I use right now a clearly filtered system, but there are other great ones too. There's Berkey, there's AquaTrue, but if you use something like AquaTrue, you want to make sure that you might be adding minerals back in, because as good as reverse osmosis systems are, pure water or spring water, or water as you would find it in nature, does have some mineral content in it. Now, obviously, based on how water's treated here, that's a whole separate show, but you want to make sure you're getting some of the mineral content you need from there too. So really, really important to kind of keep in mind. The other is sleep. Listen, one of the best ways to regulate your hormone cycles and functions, all the way around, is going to be sleep, making sure that circadian rhythm. Are we living in line with the sun and moon, the rise and fall of the sun? Are we getting early morning sun to regulate that circadian rhythm? Are we going to sleep at a regular hour with no EMFs in the room, with no outside noises, in as close to pitch black darkness as we possibly can, with no electronics on, ideally with no lights on in the room? All of these are going to affect your sleep, and that's a whole separate show that we'll go into as well. So that's what we got for non-alcoholic fatty liver. I thought this one would be shorter. We ended up at 22 minutes. So, if you guys want, this is going to be available on my YouTube channel. You could check that out. You could sign up for it. The link is on my website. If you want to work with me, get on, as to help you with any of your potential health challenges. That's why I'm here. So you can schedule a call with me if you would like. The links are on my website. You could DM me if you would like. And until next time, take care. Have a good one.